Season 2, Episode 2 of Sons of Anarchy is called Small Tears, which is an obvious ode to Gemma's situation and the result of her trauma that she experienced at the end of the previous episode. But it's also a metaphor for how small cracks and tears are forming in certain relationships on the show. From those tears, one character really shines through. Welcome to Belated Binge, the podcast that exists so that you can relive your favorite show, Sons of Anarchy. My name's Zach, and if you enjoy what I'm doing here, please subscribe to the YouTube channel or whatever podcast player you are using right now. This is the Fallout episode. Fallout from what happened to Gemma, fallout from Jax's decision and how he decided to cover up Opie's tracks with that random Mayan that they told was responsible for Donna. A lot of fallout. This episode begins in the immediate aftermath of what happened to Gemma at the end of the previous episode. As a reminder, while the boys were having a fun little party for a welcome home for Bobby since Stahl had to release him from jail, Gemma was abducted and raped by the white nationalist group that just introduced themselves to, they're basically just a big old problem for the club. And they were brought to town by Deputy Hale's brother, who is a real estate developer and wants SAMCRO out of the way so that he can bring housing developments and more money and progress to Charming. Charming guy. See what I did there? And I really enjoy the details of how the episode begins. I really like that they added the touch of Katie Seagal singing on the intro song. I love the way that they use the family pictures in that slow scroll through, the camera just kind of slowly goes by all those family photos. And it's a really good way to humanize Gemma, the character, and then obviously drop a stark contrast and pull the emotional rug out from under the audience. It's absolutely brilliant from a film work perspective, and it's also really eerie while you're going through it, because I think if you're watching the show, during that time that the camera's slowly going through the pictures, if you're not just completely brand new to the show, obviously, if you were, it would be weird that you started on episode 2, but, alas, do you. But in my mind, the majority of people watching this episode are probably in two states of mind or frames of reference in these moments. Is you might have forgotten how the previous episode actually ended, and so it's kind of like a calming way to get into an episode. You might even kind of wonder why it's such a slow start, and then bam, slap in the face, dose of Sons of Anarchy chaos reality, and wow, you're back in it, and you're reminded very, very quickly. You also might fall into another group where you might remember what happened to Gemma, and as the camera's going through those pictures, that internal tension and anxiety is just building for you as you anticipate what's about to happen next. And I think it's a really, really small thing for the start of this episode, but a really powerful one. So I really like that. What happens next is multifaceted, and we learn a lot of things in this episode as a result of Gemma's assault, like how she wants and decides to handle it. One, Unser is 100% ride or die for Gemma. Season 1 made it seem like Unser is really more a supporter of Clay in the club, but in this moment we see that Gemma trumps all other allegiances for him. We also learn that Tara is incredibly trustworthy and that she can handle herself within this chaotic world of SAMCRO better than she even thinks that she can. If she can handle what's happening to Gemma and hold herself together while being a support line for her, while keeping the secret to herself, and also everything else that takes place during this episode, she can handle some outlaw hooliganism, for sure. And we also learn that Gemma is incredibly strong-willed, which I guess, is more of a reinforcement than a new learning. It's not breaking news. However, this is by far the thickest topic and subject matter that we have seen her deal with, and she's dealing with it. It happened to her. And despite the threat of a repeat episode of what happened to her, she's not going to concede to her attacker's demands. Let's start with Unser. He's the one that discovers Gemma in the warehouse, and he apparently got called from an anonymous tip, and he recognized her car from the description on the call. And he sticks by her side through this whole experience, and he's the one that comes up with the cover for the bruises on her face by staging the car accident. And the thing that I want to stick with, and the thing that sticks with me, is the detail of Wayne. And if that doesn't make sense, I'm going to remind you. What Gemma calls Unser when she hears him is Wayne. In the moment that he shows up to rescue her, she refers to him by his first name. Everyone calls him Unser. The club, Hale, everyone. But Gemma, she calls him Wayne. And it speaks to this connection between these two that we haven't really explored yet. But we obviously will, and it'll become a very foundational layer to the show as it moves on in the story arc, as it continues to build. And in this episode, he's not a cop. He's not a friend to the MC. He's just here for Gemma. Now for Tara. She's solidifying herself in the show in a big way in this episode. For someone who's been questioning her own ability to be able to live within this outlaw biker lifestyle and be with Jax, she's right at home in the chaos. When Unser wants to take Gemma to the hospital, she won't go. Instead, she calls Tara. These two haven't been close, at all throughout season 1. Quite the contrary. They had clear tension, from the jump on this show. They started literally episode 1 of, the pilot, establishing that these two don't like each other. And while you could say that in our last episode, when Gemma gave that advice of total disclosure to Tara, that might have been a little bit of a thawing of the ice, it's certainly not enough to say that they were best friends, right? But Gemma trusts her enough to pull her away from Jax's side and trusts her to come help in her biggest moment of need, and to do it discreetly, which Tara does. And at the same time, while doing it, Tara is strong enough with Gemma to not let her steamroll her into just doing it Gemma's way, right? Tara, a lesser character than Tara, wouldn't be able to get Gemma to actually go to the hospital, let alone treat her at the hospital without anyone knowing that they're there or why they're there, especially when the waiting room fills up with a bunch of SAMCRO members. Tara's able to navigate all of that incredibly well. And I think what's most pertinent about that is that it's ultimately her idea to use Abel as cover to get into the hospital. She steps up with the nanny and is able to communicate with the nanny kind of what's going on without actually saying anything. She just takes charge in the situation in her own way. Not to mention, at the end of the episode, she jumps right into the action and, sews up Bobby. Gunshot wounds are just second nature to her at this point in time. She could ultimately thrive in this life, in the chaos, in the anarchy that is the Sons of Anarchy Motorcycle Club. And maybe if things had gone just, I don't know, a tad slightly bit different, she would have been able to. And this is actually the topic of our breakout video on YouTube. So if you want to check that one out and get into a little bit more detail about how Tara's right at home, I would love it if you would, but wait until after this one. This episode is all about fallout, as our side plot with Clay and the club is dealing with the fallout from the Mayan that Opie killed and Jax's decision of how to stage the body afterwards. See, Jax didn't tell anyone that the way he covered up Opie tagging that body was with bullet holes. And he surely didn't let them know where he dropped him, and that he dropped him displaying 9 fingers, basically pointing all 9 of them at the One Niners gang, which was surely going to have some fallout, our theme here. And Clay learns this information through Alvarez, the president of the Mayans, who calls a very, very hungover Tig after Bobby's party. And while I particularly enjoy how he rolls a half-dressed woman off the bar and then confesses his love to her, it has absolutely no impact on the show. It just brings the immaturity out of me and brings me joy. But what does matter is that Clay picks a side. He tells Alvarez that he doesn't have any guns to sell him. And then he tells Tig to call Leroy, because Leroy is going to need some guns. And then he's not particularly happy with Jax for the decision that was made. He confronts him in the hospital after he finds out about Gemma. We're quickly reminded that these two are very much not on good terms right now. And Clay won't even let Opie go with Jax to talk to Otto. Instead, Clay sends Opie with Tig, and he tries to connect with Opie about Donna, and that is extremely gross to watch. At this point, Tig has no redeemable qualities on this show, and no matter how much more human Tig seems in that moment, it's crumbling under the weight of the truth. And so is Opie's concern with death, which we see on full display at the end of the episode when he steps in the line of fire when the Mayans come in and crash the gun deal between SAMCRO and the Niners. And it's concerning. I talked in the last episode a lot about Opie and his absenteeism as a father in the previous episode, and like finding excuses to not be around his kids. And now all of a sudden he's like putting himself literally an inch from taking a bullet and leaving those kids with no parents at all. And so it goes without saying, but Opie's in a very, very dark place. And then, from there, that fallout, that's when Bobby takes his bullet, and Clay ends the episode with a heart-to-heart with Jax, arguing about the fallout of that call that he made, what he decided to do with that Mayan's body. And he gives him this speech about he doesn't care if Jax, is mad at him or whatever, but don't make it personal between the two of them, because the rest of the club is going to pick up on that and they're not going to respect Jax and blah, 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 blah. And I've always found this to be particularly funny coming from Clay, because he is the reason that things get personal. He is the king of personal. And he has no problem getting incredibly dirty over personal. And he's going to get very, very dirty as this show goes on. And it's all personal, like all the time. And I think in his mind it's business, but that's seemingly never the case. It's always personal with Clay. Whether it's him protecting himself or trying to, get retribution for something. But Jax does learn one thing here. It is a choice that he made that backfired. And I believe it's one of the many building blocks that go into building Jax as a character and as a leader, to become the plotting decision maker that he ultimately ends up being on this show, particularly as he grows. And I think this is a huge moment for him, that's going to impact later seasons. And it's not the only one. He's going to learn a lot from his experience working with Luann in this episode as well, which is, I think, a good lead-in to that particular plot point. So Otto needs help with Luann. As a reminder, Otto Delaney is in jail because of things that he did as a member of SAMCRO, and he is married to Luann, the lady that we met along the way. She's friends with Gemma, and she runs a porn studio. And this is what sets up a side plot between the club and the porn queen. She's been having trouble with another producer that's been trying to steal her girls. And now that the feds have come and shut her down, her studio was whatever they found. I can't even remember what exactly it was that they found, but the cops shut it down. And Otto suggests that only happened because of what he did to Agent Stahl at the end of season 1, which he did to help SAMCRO. So he's asking for help with Luann's situation. The club can't just bail her out. They don't have the financial capability to do so, even though that's ultimately what Luann wants. She just wants the money that she lent them in their moment of need in season 1. But they don't have it, but what they can do, and what Jax offers to do, is to get the competition to back off. And that's not going to go nearly as easy as he thinks it is, no matter how much he promises her that it will. Throughout this storyline, we're introduced to Luann's girls, Lila and the other one. What's the other one? They don't actually even say their names in this episode. But they become surprisingly important. You wouldn't think that was going to happen when you're watching this episode for the first time, but they're going to become staples. What is her name? Does it matter? But of course, we meet Georgie Caruso, the competition, with a friendly threat. Not to mention a nice gift from Bobby during that exchange, which is just disgusting. Just disgusting. You shouldn't. I mean, the moment I'm thinking. I don't have to describe it to you, but ew, right? Not particularly. It's gross, Unfortunately, it takes about 5 seconds for this encounter to backfire when Lila shows up at the hospital after taking a beating courtesy of Georgie, and Jax reacts accordingly with America's pastime. Baseball bats to all of Georgie's people. And that's fun. That's fun to watch. But it also is kind of the birth of a new project venture that Jax is going to bring to the table. SAMCRO partnering up with Luann to help her rebuild her porn studio in the gun warehouse. The gun warehouse that they just built and aren't using because the IRA demoted them to gun runners instead of gun distributors and assemblers. So it's just sitting there, empty. Might as well use it for something. And what better than porn? And that goes the way that you would expect in a room full of horny guys. Yeah, everybody's in. Of course they want to invest in porn. Of course they do. Except for Clay. He doesn't. And it's unclear to me if this is some kind of character thing. He just, I don't know. He's totally fine with hookers and murder, but he draws the line at pornography, I guess. I don't know. But it also could just be that this is something that Jax brought to the table and thinks is a good idea, and therefore he's just against it on principle at this point. Because, don't make it personal. But it does lead to one of the funniest scenes in the entire episode when Jax has Luann meet him at the warehouse, and she thinks that he's gonna kill her. So they play that up for tension, and it's pretty funny. And the best part about this is the hidden gem where he calls it Adriana-ing her. He says, do you think I brought you here to Adriana you? Which is an inside joke. It's a callback to The Sopranos, which I have not seen, but I hope to watch it, and quite frankly, I kind of planned to cover it on this podcast at some point in time. But my understanding through, cultural references and becoming familiar with Sons of Anarchy and that tie is that that's how the Adriana character dies on The Sopranos, is that she gets lured into this, and apparently, however that plays out. But the reason that this is so cool is, guess who plays Adriana on Sopranos? It's Drea De Matteo, who plays Wendy on Sons of Anarchy. It's just a fun connecting moment between these two iconic TV shows that are in those conversations of the greatest TV dramas of all time, at least within this vertical, right? Some people aren't into these anti-hero type shows, but if this is your world, these are iconic. These are royalty. Regardless, Luann agrees, and now SAMCRO is in the porn business. And then, of course, on the bad guy side, we get a lot of Weston weaved in and out of this episode, too. It starts with him tailing Clay on the meeting with Leroy. He also follows him to the hospital and sees him playing with Abel like nothing happened. And this actually has Weston a little bit spooked, it seems. When he brings it back to his boss, it's almost like he's a little bit panicked. Like he did something disgusting for the cause because his boss said that that's what they needed to do and it was going to work, and now it didn't work, and he's in his feelings about it. And we don't think about his character as really having feelings very much, or really even as a human being, and rightfully so. Anyone who is as racist as he is and is capable of doing the disgusting things that he does doesn't deserve our empathy, or to have a pulse for that matter. But one thing that this show does particularly well, especially with characters like this, is giving its villains some depth. And this seemingly one-dimensional bad guy is no different. It starts with his second guessing of the plan, and we'll see more instances of humanizing him throughout the season, particularly when his children are introduced to the show. But that only goes so far, right? This guy is garbage. But he's not a caricature either. And I think that's important. And his boss certainly is not a caricature. We see who he has struck up a relationship with on this show, with the Mayans. He ends up being the one who tips them off about that gun deal that was going down between SAMCRO and the Niners. And so we see them, that's that first realization that those two have gotten into bed together. And of course, he's not telling Weston about this relationship because he's 100% against any friendliness to any other race. But that is not the case for the big boss, right? He's willing to pretty much break his own rules and the rules of law and any codes of any kind. This is a lawless man who seems to feel like he is so righteous and so right and so untouchable, almost as if there will be no consequences to any action that he takes on the business legal side, on the white nationalist side, on the completely gross side. He doesn't think that anything's ever going to be able to touch him. And it turns out later in the season, we realize why that's the case. And it just when that moment happens, and I'm not going to talk about it too much here because I want to be able to talk about it then, it's like an absolute knife just being twisted, because you realize how he got that confidence and that feeling of just being untouchable, and it's just infuriating. Let's wrap it up with Gemma and the way that she handles her situation and what it tells us about her character in particular, because it's quite illuminating, I think, in the way that she's strong but also fragile. It's a delicate balance, and one that Katie Sagal, I think, plays pretty well. The strength that it takes, whether you agree with the decision that she's making or not, to not tell Clay and Jax what happened to her. Because that's exactly what the bad guys want. They want her to deliver that message. That's why they did it. And she's like, nope, not gonna do it. They're not gonna win. They're not gonna get the thing that they wanted out of doing this to me. I'm not gonna give them that. But she's also fragile. And she doesn't want anybody to know what happened because she's a victim in all of this. And she's emotional about it. She won't even let Clay kiss her when she sees him. She cringes at the touch of her own husband. It's the emotional toll and the weight of what she went through, and just having to try to pretend to be normal following that, particularly right in the aftermath, is just, it's wild. And this might be the first time on this show we actually see her cry. I didn't go back and scour the tape from season 1, but I don't remember a moment. And she's also opening herself up a little bit, I think, with the nanny. First, they have that chapel moment, and then in the kitchen when she's about to get emotional with her before Tara interrupts to say that she has to go deal with, Bobby's bullet hole. I think it's, again, I think it's doing a lot while actually doing a little. I think it's a difficult balance for shows to do, to not overdo it, but also really get that across in small, subtle ways. And I think that this episode does it really well, particularly highlighted in the final fade to black scene where she has that moment where she's walking through the hallway of the clubhouse heading towards John's bike, which kind of looks a little bit like that behind me. You can see so much play out on her face, and then you also get that up on the roof of the clubhouse, which is kind of like Jax's spot. And, she's being comforted by her son, and he has no idea why she needs the comfort in the first place. It's kind of beautiful for being so awful. As I mentioned before, this episode is all about fallout. Fallout for Gemma, fallout from Donna, fallout for Jax, for Clay. It's a fairly quiet episode in terms of tone. They squeeze in some action at the end because this is Sons of Anarchy and you've got to have some bullets. But for the most part, it's a lot of heavy drama and trauma. And it's honestly a tough one to get through because it's so Gemma heavy. Not that that isn't quality or that Katie Sagal doesn't absolutely kill it as Gemma, but because the subject matter is just so incredibly uncomfortable. I make a lot of content. Some I do better than others. And I have no idea how to make good content about this. So for the most part, I'm not going to try. I am, however, going to try to keep making good content about my favorite show, Sons of Anarchy, and I'm completely stoked that you are here along with me. If you can go ahead and let me know what you think of Tara in this episode. For me, she's the MVP, but what do you think? You can comment below if you're on YouTube or join the free Facebook group and let us know there. There is also a Patreon for the show, patreon.com/belatedbinge. If you are so inclined to support the show and get some bonus content, you can do so over there, like the fanfiction of a sequel series that I was writing back in 2020 before podcasting took over my life. And remember, life is short. Buy the motorcycle. But when you do, wear a helmet. One of those. Dress for the slide, not the ride. And remember to take Belated Binge with you on that ride.